Hello and welcome to Podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. When you're ready to launch your next app or want to try a project you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so take a look at our friends over at Linode. With the launch of their managed Kubernetes platform, it's easy to get started with the next generation of deployment and scaling, powered by the battle-tested Linode platform, including simple pricing, node balancers, 40 gigabit networking, dedicated CPU and GPU instances, and worldwide data centers. Go to pythonpodcast.com/Linode, that's Linode, today and get a $100 credit to try out a Kubernetes cluster of your own. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. Your host, as usual, is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Antti Karjalainen about the RPA Framework for automating your daily tasks and his work at Robocorp to manage your robots in production. So, Antti, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hey, so I'm Antti Karjalainen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Robocorp. We are bringing open source technology into the world of RPA, which is all about automating business processes.
And do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
First got introduced to Python. I was trying to think about this. It's way back, something like 2006. I have a software engineering background, so that's when I was really starting out, and Python was becoming popular. Python has always been there as a thing that existed in my world. I can't remember the first time I got introduced, but it's just been over there always.
Yes, become part of sort of the background noise of programming.
Exactly.
Before we get too deep into what you're building at Robocorp and the RPA framework, can you start by just giving a bit of an overview about what robotic process automation is and some of the types of use cases that it's employed for?
So RPA is really a way to automate anything that human users would do on IT systems. So it has the capability to mimic human behavior on systems. So the way I like to actually think about RPA, it's a form of agent-based automation. So you have this software agent that can act upon any system out there. It's running on a specific location and might be using user credentials just like a human user would. But then there's nuances how it can access systems and so on. I think we're going to go deeper into that a bit later. But on the simple explanation side, it would be a way to reduce manual routine work from human users without having to change your existing IT systems too much.
Yeah, so from my understanding, some examples would be going to a website, downloading an Excel file, changing some of the cells in there, maybe adding a formula, and then saving that and then re-uploading it to a different portal would be something that you might do with RPA.
Yeah, exactly. You would be surprised how much people spend their working days on really routine tasks accomplished with digital systems. It's sort of this new type of manual labor that people are just used to doing. So people rarely even question the things that they do from day to day with IT systems. And, there might be pushback from the techies saying that, you shouldn't do that in the first place and so on and so on. You should redesign your systems. But then again, when you start to look at the economics of it all, are you going to really redesign your ERP system in order to get one accountant's life a bit better? So that's not going to happen. So that's where RPA steps in and is able to pick up that work.
And as developers, our natural inclination is to say, oh, I'll just write a script or I'll use the API or whatever. So I'm wondering, what are the cases where somebody might use RPA and some of the advantages that it has over writing a custom library or a Python script to be able to automate some given task, and just sort of the trade-offs of time investment and usability and sort of who the audience is for the tooling?
So RPA tools started with these kind of drag and drop type of tools where you build a process or automation with just combining a bunch of tasks or actions together. They started to become more sophisticated, and now we are seeing something like Robocorp, where we are actually starting to take Python-based tooling and apply it for RPA. At the end of the day, it's really not that different from a Python script. It's sort of a weaponized form of that, if you want to use that. So I wrote a Medium article some time ago actually saying that one use case for RPA is in a way building proper governance around all the dirty hacks that coders have been doing for years. On the fundamental technical layer of what the actual script does, there's really, you can blur the lines of just scripting with RPA, but how you actually deploy it inside of an organization, that's where the differences are going to start appearing. So you're going to have security governance, access control, scheduling, remote execution, and so on, built on top of that script. So it becomes actually a maintainable piece of your IT infrastructure.
Another type of automation that's been gaining ground a lot is systems such as Zapier or If This Then That, for being able to tie together sort of event-based workflows between different systems, where my email might hook into my CRM, might hook into my accounting software, and I can use something like Zapier to say, when this happens in this software, do this other thing in this other piece of software. And these different SaaS providers will have hooks into Zapier or into IFTTT for being able to perform these workflows. And I'm wondering how the functionality and use cases of RPA compare to some of those automation services, and where something like Zapier might fall down and RPA might be the preferred tool of choice.
So workflow automation like Zapier and If This Then That, they are adjacent to RPA, but they don't overlap too much. Sure, you can try to use RPA in that way. Oftentimes it just doesn't make sense. These tools, these Zapiers and likes, are API-based automation. They are, in a sense, automated workflows, while RPA is coming back to that agent topic that I mentioned. So that agent can run on your desktop, that can run inside your corporate network on a VM. It can automate things like mainframe terminals if you wanted to. So it can do pretty much anything that you make it do. Some things make more sense than others to do with RPA. But I think RPA is really about enabling those sort of long tail use cases, while the workflow automation will try to do the mainstream stuff like combining SaaS apps where the SaaS app provider hasn't, gotten around to build an integration.
In terms of your involvement with RPA and what you're building at Robocorp, I'm wondering if you can just give a bit more context of sort of what you're working on and your motivation for getting involved in this area of the industry and turning it into a business.
So I've been involved with this project called Robotic Framework for quite a while. Already 2013, I think I started there. We were running a consultancy where we did a lot of software test automation back in the day. And Robotic Framework is a generic Python-based test automation framework for doing end-to-end testing. So I had that background. I've been also involved in creating the Robotic Framework Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that governs over that project, with over 40 member companies sponsoring it. So there's an active, vibrant community around that specific tool. And I just saw the rise of RPA in, I think it was 2016. I immediately thought that looks exactly like test automation. What's any difference there between end-to-end test automation and RPA, where you essentially want to do the same kind of things? And I started exploring, really cold calling people that I could find out there doing RPA, and started to understand it. From the technical level, it seemed that they are in fact pretty identical. It's only on the governance and orchestration side where the differences really start appearing, where you run test automation with something like CI/CD tooling. Also, in test automation, you build hundreds of and even thousands of automation routines and manage them by DevOps teams, while in RPA, you might have a dozen automations that we actually call robots. It's a funny term to call something a piece of code robot. But the more you spend time in the industry, the more used to it you are. And I don't find it any troubling anymore. So I'm just going to use that term, bots or robots. You're going to have, a dozen bots that are maintained by one or two RPA developers inside of an enterprise. I really started seeing that similarity between this open source world that I was involved in and this new emerging field in enterprise software. And I wondered that, is there a possibility we could actually introduce this existing open source ecosystem to this new rising space of RPA, and just really started pushing that. And we started on the open source side. 2018, I think that was the year when we introduced some of the RPA syntax capabilities into Robotic Framework. And people just got excited about that and really saw the promise of what we can do. But when you went kind of further into that and started applying it into like proper organizations inside larger companies, you saw that we were lacking a lot of really tooling Robotic Framework and how it's supposed to run as an RPA solution. So I wanted to create a company that really creates that tooling that was missing in the ecosystem back then. And also we wanted to create a lot of documentation, learning material, and so forth. Essentially built this community around Robot Framework based open source RPA. That's how it all started, and still on that journey.
In terms of the end user that you're targeting with Robocorp and the RPA framework, who are you directing your communications toward? Who's the person that's actually going to become a customer of you directly? And how does that inform the products that you're building and the direction that you're taking the business?
In a way, the end user is a developer. We want to really have a great developer experience. That's where it all started. So we are building tools for developers like VS Code extensions and Jupyter Lab-based experiences. Also a lot of just other developer-focused tooling. But the buyer isn't the developer. The developer doesn't buy our service. Our SaaS offering is the line of business folks who do that. So there we are balancing between the developer messaging and also the business value positioning that we need to do. So this is sort of a nuanced marketing problem that keeps going here. So we need to communicate to both sides of the fence, both to the business decision maker, even the CFOs and the CIOs and so forth, and then really have a great story to tell for the developers who use the product.
In terms of the broader ecosystem of RPA tools, you mentioned Robot Framework that started out its life as this end-to-end test automation platform, and you're giving it RPA capabilities through the RPA framework. And you mentioned that there are some other businesses that are targeting the enterprise space. And I'm wondering just what is the kind of constellation of services and systems that are available for building RPA and employing it in an organization? And where do you see Robocorp and RPA Framework fitting in that larger ecosystem?
If I can kind of paint the picture in a way of that full stack. So we created this open source automation stack that's based on Robot Framework and Python. So on the bottom, you have Python. On top of that, you have a Robot Framework. And next to Robot Framework, you'll have RPA Framework. So RPA Framework is a set of libraries that allow you to perform typical RPA tasks like, manipulating Excel and so forth. They're really underneath. They are a huge collection of different Python libraries that have been put in a form that are easy to consume for the RPA developer. And then on top of that, we have a tool chain called RCC, which is really part of the secret sauce that we are bringing into the open source space. And I think this is really unique approach that we have here. So RCC is a way for you to, in a sense, easily distribute Python-based scripts that are running even hundreds of dependencies without any headache. So if you think about what we're doing in RPA, we are deploying these Python-based routines on remote machines and expecting them to execute their thing really fast, reliably, without hiccups, and manage dependencies really fluently. Python doesn't have good facilities for that out of the box. You could do something like, requirements files and pip installs, but that gets a bit messy really, really fast. And if you try to do that over and over again, you're going to be managing virtual environments and what have you. So we built RCC as a seamless open source tool chain to really put everything together in a way that the RPA developer doesn't need to deal with that headache of managing packages and environments. It just works. So that's the open source stack. Anything that you can do, things like create new projects, run them, package them, and deploy them. And then on top of that, we have a host of editors and tools. Obviously, you can use the editor of your choice, but we have VS Code extension for Robocorp that makes it a bit easier to manage all of that. And also we have a Jupyter-based environment called Robocorp Lab, which comes essentially with a single installer that you can deploy anywhere. And you'll have batteries included there. You can start building immediately. That's for the kind of new users coming into the ecosystem. That's all free and open source and publicly available. And on top of that, the platform that you use to operate and orchestrate your robots when you want to do a proper deployment. Then we have Robocorp Cloud for that. And that's a cloud native platform for really running, monitoring, and orchestrating those robots in production then.
In terms of the kind of complications and challenges that developers might run into when building these RPA systems and deploying them to end users, you mentioned some of the things like managing the dependencies and the libraries and getting Python running on the system. And so that's what the RCC toolchain is aiming to provide. But beyond that, what are some of the complexities that developers of RPA tools might run into as far as handling credentials or educating end users on how to be able to customize the flows to be able to fit their specific use cases? And what is the granularity of detail that somebody who's building these RPA systems might go to as far as just saying, here is the entire system, you just click a button and it does its thing? Or is it, here are the building blocks, you just need to add these pieces of syntax and then you can customize it to be able to fit your workflow, within this kind of constrained space?
Regarding credential management and these kind of things, we provide that through Robocorp Cloud. So that's a common thing that we wanted to solve for everyone. When you start an RPA project, you start off with a process definition of some sort. So you have the current process that you need to go and automate. The auditor will go and tell you that I need to go in every month and take screenshots of SAP and Salesforce and make sure that those things match and then store them somewhere on a network drive. It takes me, 3 to 4 hours, let's say on a weekly basis. Can you help me out? And then they'll show you what they're doing. As an RPA developer, you'll need to take that as is process, kind of try to think about, can you make it a bit better somehow? Can you improve the process itself? And then when you're satisfied with the design, you need to translate that into a working robot, working piece of script in a way. You'll start looking through the libraries that are in Robocorp ecosystem or in the Robo Framework ecosystem. You kind of see, okay, I need to do browser automation here. I might want to have something for SAP. You look through the documentation, understand what kind of keywords they offer, and really start putting it together. The best case is that that's really straightforward. Within a few hours, you test it and you deploy it. But always bump into something that there's a weird system from the late 90s that you need to interact with, and it's going to be kind of just challenging getting any handle on that thing. For that kind of purpose, we have things like image-based automation, so you can match image templates in that UI and try to automate it on the surface. Then we are even going a bit further than that, and we're actually developing deep learning-based systems that can classify UI elements and automate them that way. So try to make that process a bit more manageable if you need to do that level of automation. So there's a whole range of stuff. Sometimes you need to be this reverse engineering master in a way. If you go and automate some web app that doesn't have any proper API to it or any proper controls, you might need to go deep and understand how the DOM is built and what kind of XPath you want to craft in order to get in there and really make it robust and reliable. So you need to know a ton of things about a lot of different systems, how they're built, and be able to reverse engineer them at times to get the most reliable and robust solution. So that's really all about RPA. It's a kind of special kind of development challenge.
Digging a bit deeper into RPA Framework and the Robocorp stack itself, can you give a bit more detail as to sort of the system architecture and the set of sort of libraries and utilities within the Python ecosystem that you're relying on, and just some of the ways that the overall scope and design of the project has evolved since you first began working on it?
Yeah, RPA Framework is sort of sub piece of the thing that we build. So as I described, we have to build a host of projects, but RPA Framework is one key component in the stack that allows you to do a lot of these actions that are expected of RPA systems. So we typically leverage existing Python projects for Excel manipulation, there's PyExcel, and for image-based automation, there are a host of different kind of projects out there. Browser automation, we leverage Selenium underneath, and that's wrapped into Robo Framework keywords to make it easy to consume. We also have Playwright support right now. So Playwright is a pretty interesting way to automate a browser and makes life a bit easier than compared to Selenium. We have support for that as well. So it's more about in a way, RPA Framework is more about the sort of breadth than the depth of the project. So you need to be able to design these keywords that are really ergonomic to use cover a lot of the typical use cases. And these keywords underneath, these Robot Framework keywords underneath, they translate into Python calls into different kind of libraries. So that's really how RPA Framework has been built. I think the version is right now, we have something like 9 point something version. So you can imagine that there has been a lot of iteration going on over the past year and a half as we've been building it. And we try to incorporate a lot of our customers and users' feedback. Somebody has a use case around, let's say, Excel, they report back, hey guys, I'm having difficulty with this kind of use case. Can you help me? And we see that augmenting RPA Framework is the best way to answer that. And so we'll just put it in there. And so that really drives that project. It's a huge set of keywords for Robot Framework. And underneath that, that's actually usable with Python as well. There's a Python API available. So you can actually use just plain Python to access some of the RPA Framework functionality as well.
In terms of the developer experience, as you mentioned, you can just do this directly in Python. And if you're also relying on some of the components from Robot Framework, do you have an API into that system to be able to do it all natively in Python as well? Or do you use sort of the specialized syntax that Robot Framework provides? And what's the dividing line between when you might want to do it all in Python versus when you might want to rely on the customized syntax for the Robot Framework?
Excellent question to have. So Robot Framework, the way I think about it myself, it's a way to simplify automation developer. It's really this procedural syntax that's easy to understand on the top level. So, if I need to go to a website and click something there, what I'll do with Robot Framework is I'll include one library, the browser library, and then I just say open browser, click, and that's that. It's few lines, and I don't need to understand how that thing does it underneath, what kind of web driver is using, and so forth, and what version of Selenium is compatible there. So it just makes it a bit easier. When you need to do any kind of heavy lifting, you start manipulating a lot of data, let's say, then just use pandas. That's what it's meant for. From Robot Framework, you can call natively into Python code. So you can have Robot Framework files and Python files next to each other, and you can just call from Robot Framework into Python, return objects as you need. So it's really fluent to switch between these two modes. But what really Robot Framework allows you to have, in addition to that simple syntax, that's kind of new user friendly. So even if you don't know Python, you can start using that pretty easily. But that also kind of brings one additional point to the table, which is logging. So it has really good logging facilities. So it'll create this detailed trace of what happened on a kind of a visual format that's easy to follow. And so you'll have that for each execution of the robot. That gets stored as well in Robocorp Cloud. So if something goes wrong, you can dive straight into that log and pinpoint your problem in a matter of seconds. Or then, you oftentimes need to build an audit trail to show what the robot did at what time. So you'll have that as well. So it's all about, that ease of getting into the scripting, the ability to pull from readily available keywords without having to understand all the libraries that go behind those. They are curated for the RPA use case, and then it's going to bring in great logging. But if you want to do something complicated, just do it in Python. That's my advice always. Like when it starts to look ugly on the Robot Framework script side, that's the time to move to Python.
Software is read more than it is written, so complex and poorly organized logic slows down everyone who has to work with it. Sorcery makes those problems a thing of the past, giving you automatic refactoring recommendations in your IDE or text editor while you write, and yes, I even have it working in Emacs. It isn't just another linting tool that nags you about issues. It's like pair programming with a senior engineer, finding and applying structural improvements to your functions so that you can write cleaner code faster. Best of all, listeners of podcast.init get 6 months of their pro tier for free if you go to pythonpodcast.com/sorcery today. That's SOURCERY, and use the promo code INIT when you sign up. And in terms of the level of complexity of these workflows, as you mentioned, there's a tipping point where you decide, okay, I'm going to switch from using Robot Framework and move it into Python. But for workflows that are naturally segmented, what is the capability for being able to chain together multiple robots into a more kind of complex and fully featured workflow beyond just, you might have one that does 2 or 3 steps that are, fairly rote and somewhat time consuming, but relatively simple. And then, I want to be able to actually tie together, you know, 5 or 6 different robots where the output of one step is actually the input to 3 other different robots that have different responsibilities or things like that.
So for that, we built what we call data pipelines into Robocorp Cloud. So that allows you to run these tasks or these workloads in steps, that each step can fit into another step and so forth. And processes can be chained into other processes by passing on data. So we really built that into the management platform side of it all. I know some people are using like external databases to facilitate switching states between processes and so forth. But if you want to kind of keep it simple, then Robocorp has that covered. But that's kind of typical in RPA, where you might have processes that need to, let's say, collect data from 5 different sources, and that data might come over the span of multiple days. And then when you have everything in place, you can continue working on something and kick off another stage. And so that's how you typically build these processes that are long lasting over time and build them together.
For people who have a specialized use case where RPA Framework and Robot Framework have the majority of the functionality, but there's this bespoke system that I need to be able to integrate with, what are the options for being able to add new components to RPA Framework or be able to integrate into that runtime from Python to be able to maybe integrate it into a larger application or pull in some additional functionality that isn't there yet?
Yeah, so it's really common that you'll build some sort of a Python library next to your RPA project. Even though Robot Framework itself has hundreds of thousands of users around the world, Python has over 7 million. So every molecule in the universe probably has a Python library to it. So you can really leverage that extensive community there and lean into that. So when you have that bespoke thing that you need to attach to, you can write a piece of Python code to do that and expose that piece as a Robot Framework keyword. It's a simple API. So you can expose that to your Robot Framework syntax and you can simply call to it. Or you can have that piece of the workflow be done 100% in Python. It's up to you really as a developer.
As far as the open source aspect of RPA Framework and RCC and kind of the dividing line between it and Robocorp, as you mentioned, you have this management platform for being able to deploy things to the cloud and be able to manage more complicated workflows or sort of the team aspect. But then you also have these open source components. And I'm wondering, what are the dividing lines between something that you're going to sell as a product versus release to the community and your overall approach to governance of the open source aspects of this ecosystem?
Open source is really important part of what we're building. I'm a firm believer in that. I don't think there's any other way to build software than to lean into open source really nowadays. Everything that you use as a developer to build a robot and make it run and so forth, that's open source. So the dev tools and the whole automation stack, starting from Robot Framework and the RPA Framework and then going to RCC, they are Apache 2 licensed. So really permissive open source license there. The Robocorp Cloud platform that you have for deploying these robots to run either in the cloud or then locally as well. You can deploy them locally through an agent. That's really a managed service that we as a company then provide with SLA included and everything that comes with that. So have a lot of governance and security and compliance requirements that come with larger organizations. In order to really be able to respond to those, we provide that as a managed service. So there's the clear line is anything that's Robocorp Cloud and the orchestration platform there, that's really our commercial end of the things. And outside of that, it's open source. So RCC is, in a way, it's a bridge between those two worlds. We build it initially to solve our own problems, how we can easily create projects and then run them anywhere without any pre-installed dependencies, without actually even requiring Python to be there in the first place. And then be able to deploy those routines across hundreds and thousands of different environments and be able to update them seamlessly and so forth. This kind of management headache, that was the first question that we asked from ourselves when we were envisioning the company and what we wanted to build. We thought to ourselves, man, that's going to be a problem. Like, has anyone solved that? So when we started working, we ended up solving it, and we thought that this might be actually useful for some other people out there as well. And that's really RCC is the bridge that we decided to then open source, and it's a large part of our own IP that we've been able to bring. And I think that if you put some marketing effort behind it, it should be something that others in the Python world, even people who are not interested in RPA one bit should be able to look into and say that, man, this is a useful project. We need to have this.
When I was looking at it, I noticed that it's written in Go, which, because of the fact that you're targeting this as something that's easy to just drop on a system and get up and running, is sort of a natural choice because of Go's toolchain for being easily statically compile things. And I'm curious if there were any kind of challenges or complexities that you ran into interoperating with Go as sort of the base layer and then being able to bootstrap Python into then executing all these other workflows and sort of packaging up and managing the dependencies and just some of the complexities that you ran into there.
We're actually leaning into Conda over there for package managing quite a bit. And we are using something called Micromamba internally to manage Conda environments. I'm working with the original author of that project to tightly integrate that into the chain. Lucky for me, I haven't been the one to implement that, so I don't know all the pain and sweat and tears to go into RCC, but I can vouch that that's plentiful. So what it does underneath the hood is it keeps track of all the dependencies and files that you have cached locally, and is able to pull the required environment together really fast when you need to run something. And so it's actually a pretty efficient way to manage things like if you have, let's say that we are running in the cloud side, we are running hundreds of different types of Python environments all the time. If you have them as separate environments installed, it's going to probably consume, these are big libraries, so it consumes thousands upon thousands of gigabytes of actually data to store these hundreds of different individual environments with huge dependency loads. With RCC, it actually compresses into just few gigs. So it doesn't store anything twice there, and it manages all that under the hood pretty elegantly. So actually, there's a few patents that we have pending for some of the stuff that goes into RCC. But yeah, I mean, we spent a considerable amount of time on that. That's all I can say. So we know too much about Python dependence management.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how this plays out in relation to things like PyOxidizer and some of the other approaches that are out in the community for being able to statically compile a hermetically contained Python environment and runtime and all the dependencies.
It actually, with the latest release, is going to do some of that same stuff. In some instances, we have the requirement to ship a static instance of a robot. So when we are talking about really high security stuff like government and the sort of government and military side of things, they don't really allow you to start loading packages dynamically from Python package index or anything like that. That's really out of the question. So we just need to exactly hermetically seal and everything and make sure that they are approved and scanned and so forth, and ship that as the robot. So that's something that RCC is built to be able to handle as well.
In terms of the use cases and the sort of implementations of the different robots and workflows that people have built using RPA Framework and Robocorp, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you've seen it employed?
I think what's amazing with it is sometimes just the sheer amount of manual grinding routine it can automate away. So I've heard that, people are doing like healthcare insurance claim automation at hospitals where it just frees away like half a day every day from somebody's work. But I also know of a bank in the Nordics that they use this technology to automate away a routine that they had to do. So they had to actually go through all of their business applications and update the end users, the customers' phone records due to a regulatory change that was pending. So they used Robotic Framework to build that automation, and they actually ended up saving, I think they quoted this to me, so they saved 7 years of their customers' waiting time on the phone within 1 month. So having that kind of result, think about it, 7 years of just people waiting on the phone and being able to get rid of that is pretty amazing.
Sort of the perennial promise of computers is that it's supposed to save us all of this time, and yet so many of us end up wasting a huge amount of our time on very tedious and menial tasks that the computer is supposed to do for us. So it's definitely great to see that, there are some cases where that promise is actually being realized.
Exactly.
In your own experience of building and growing the RPA framework and Robocorp and sort of the business and community around all of it, what are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned?
Running a startup, obviously, is a lot of hard work. There's no way around it. I always say this to everyone who's about to join the company. I tell them that, look, we live in dog years. So 1 year over here will be equivalent to 7 years in a regular company. I think that holds true oftentimes. The timelines are so condensed. You need to achieve a lot of things in just a short time, and you're constantly under pressure to perform and grow the business. So I wouldn't change it for anything, I have to say, but it's definitely a unique set of challenges and something that you really can't prepare for in advance.
We've all been asked to help with an ad hoc request for data by the sales and marketing team. Then it becomes a critical report that they need updated every week or every day. Then what do? Send a CSV file via email? Write some Python scripts to automate it? But what about incremental sync, API quotas, error handling, and all of the other details that eat up your time? Today there is a better way. With Census, just write SQL or plug in your DBT models and start syncing your cloud data warehouse to SaaS applications like Salesforce, Marketo, HubSpot, and many more. Go to pythonpodcast.com/census today to get a free 14-day trial and make your life a lot easier. Another thing that I'm curious about is how much you're using RPA Framework and Robocorp to be able to build out and maintain Robocorp itself, and just sort of how much of your own work you're using to be able to perpetuate the work that you're doing.
I typically say that every company will have some sort of a routine thing that's automatable with RPA. It's not just for the largest of the large enterprises out there. Something like a startup will be so fast moving that you're not going to have static processes that are going to be sitting there in place for long enough to kind of get in anyone's way, usually. Or then you do them on purpose the wrong way. Kind of you do purposely things that don't scale because that's the fastest thing to get there. So, we have some nagging things in payroll, for instance, that we need to do every month. We've been wanting to automate away. We just simply haven't been able to get to that. But what we actually have in place is, I think we have one bot that handles Slack invitations because Slack didn't have any good way to automate that. So we have one robot in place to do that. Don't tell Slack, they probably shut it down. But then we also have one robot that'll check Office's security system each night and let us know if somebody forgot to turn it on. So these are pretty trivial things, but these are the ones that I know of, at least. We might have something like scraping the web for some data here and there, but these are the ones I know of. And they have been fairly long-standing and running and serving us well. It's pretty fun to have those.
So for people who are looking at the things that they're doing in their day-to-day and starting to think, oh, this might be a good opportunity for RPA or RPA framework, what are the cases where it's the wrong choice and you might be better served either just continuing to do something manually or using a different approach to automation?
I would refer to that XKCD comic that's out there. There's this matrix of how much time it takes for you to automate versus how much it'll save, and it'll tell you the breaking point. So I start with that XKCD comic, and then oftentimes RPA is sometimes popularized as something that should be on everyone's desktop. It should be there for every business user in a company, that they should automate away their routines. Oftentimes your personal routines are not so time consuming that you would want to apply RPA to them. So it's oftentimes when you go into things that run across people or across organizations that you're going to find these sort of larger, more rewarding automation tasks that you can deploy. So on the personal level, there might be some things like, I know a guy who used to book his tennis courses, like tennis appointments with a bot. But beyond that, it's really rare to see actually somebody running it on their desktop if it's not like web scraping a bunch of stuff for them or something like that. So there's there might be definitely better solutions out there for simple point tasks like that. So always check before you apply it if you have some other way to do it. There are definitely a ton of times where RPA is the right choice, but don't try to replace Zapier with it if you're not that kind of person who likes to maintain stuff. If it's not a hobby for you, and use it wisely where it sort of has its strengths.
As you continue to work on Robocorp and the tool chain for the RPA framework and RCC, what do you have planned for the future of the business and the platform?
So many things. The difficulty is trying to limit the scope of the things where we engage in instead of just figuring out new ways to burn more capital. So I guess staying focused is number one. Right now, we are really keen on getting started with our enterprise users. So we've been working hard to get the platform in a state where it can pass all the strictest requirements of the largest of the large enterprise users out there. We are starting some of those deployments right now. That's super exciting. And then maybe the next stage that I'm really excited about as well is our partner network. So we have roughly 40 or 50 active partners globally building on top of Robocorp. We are adding new ones almost daily nowadays, but really enabling partners to build business on top of Robocorp and the platform that we created. That's something that I'm super excited about. We have a lot of new things that we are building on that side, which essentially allow some of these partners to run what we call robot as a service. And that's a great way to operate for mid-market users specifically. So I think the robot as a service wave is something. Once we have conquered the enterprise side of things or started a journey, we will turn our attention to the robot as a service in full force.
Are there any other aspects of RPA in general or the work that you're doing at Robocorp and on RPA Framework and RCC that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to uncover there, and I'm envious of the people who are building a point solution that you can click and buy, and that's it. It does a thing for you, and that's the end of the story. But RPA and building this kind of developer ecosystem and a stack of open source developer tooling and a cloud platform and everything, it has a lot of things to uncover there. So I think we went through the basics, but I think one last thing would be that if anyone is interested in getting into RPA more, we have great documentation on robocorp.com/docs. There's even a free certification course that you can take. The first level 1 is going to take you just a while to complete. The level 2 is going to be a bit more demanding, but I challenge everyone to try to get a stab at it and try to see if they're interested in learning about RPA, what it's like. And those certification courses are a great way to get into it.
On the point of certification, what are some of the types of organizations or jobs where that certification would be useful or that people might be looking to that?
Good question. RPA developer market is growing fast. So our partners who work on the mid-market side, they are basically limited in just getting RPA developers hired. That's the limiting factor, as you might imagine. Enterprise is the same thing. Getting RPA developers to join is limiting factor. I'd say that, if you have some experience in scripting, you're interested in gaining new skills there and, starting your career there, getting into RPA might be actually a great step towards learning new skills. And because if you start building on something like Robocorp, you'll learn RPA Framework. You also learn Python. You get skills where you can actually take them to other places as well. So that might be a great place to enter the world of software in broader terms. It's in high demand right now in many, many places.
Well, for anybody who wants to learn more about that or get in touch and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And so with that, I'll move us into the picks. And this week, I'm going to choose the WandaVision series. I just watched those recently. It's only 9 episodes, so it's a little mini series, so you don't have to invest a bunch of time into it. But it's just a really well executed story and interesting and a few good twists to it. And it's interesting how they weave it in with the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So definitely worth taking a look at that if you are looking for something to watch. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Antti. Do you have any picks this week?
My pick is going to be a movie. I rarely watch movies, but I watched this last week. It was The Tenant. And if you're able to watch that and understand it the first go, good luck. So that was a mind bender.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and share the work that you're doing. It's definitely a very interesting problem area and a very interesting approach to it. I appreciate all the work that you're doing to make it open source and accessible to more developers as well. So thank you for all the time and effort you've put into that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, the Data Engineering Podcast, at dataengineeringpodcast.com for the latest on modern data management. And visit the site at pythonpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts@podcastinit.com with your story. To help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.